I was 39 and working the evening shift at Wendy's when I first saw Marcus. He was 24, fresh-faced, and had this earnest way about him that should have bored me to tears. I'd always gone for the bad boys, guys with rough edges, and that dangerous appeal that keeps you guessing. But there was something about the way Marcus handled himself that night that caught my attention. The manager was screaming at one of the newer employees, some teenage kid who'd messed up an order. Most customers would have just looked the other way, maybe rolled their eyes and waited for their food. But Marcus stepped up. He didn't raise his voice or make a scene. He just calmly told the manager that there was no need to humiliate the kid like that, and maybe they could handle it more professionally. The manager backed down immediately, probably because Marcus had this quiet authority that made people listen. I found myself watching him more closely after that. Here was this young guy, probably still in college, who had more backbone than most men twice his age. When he came up to the counter to order, I made sure I was the one helping him. We ended up talking for 20 minutes after my shift ended. He was working on his undergraduate degree, had these big plans for graduate school, and talked about wanting to make a difference in the world. Normally, that kind of idealistic talk would have made me want to gag, but coming from him, it seemed genuine. Marcus was nothing like the men I usually dated. He was polite, considerate, and treated me with a respect I wasn't used to. I'd been divorced from Rick for 2 years by then, and those had been 2 years of freedom from his constant cheating, his crude comments, and his general lack of giving a damn about anyone but himself. Rick was the father of my children, and our marriage had been a disaster from start to finish. But Marcus was different. He was stable, reliable, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. The problems started early, though I didn't recognize them as problems at the time. About 3 months into our relationship, Marcus came over to my house to pick me up for dinner. Rick was there. He'd dropped by unannounced to see the kids, which was typical of his boundary-ignoring behavior. The moment Rick saw Marcus, I could see that familiar look in his eyes. He was going to cause trouble. Well, Rick said, looking Marcus up and down like he was sizing up competition. Who is this young chump? Is this your nephew or something? I tried to deflect, but Rick wasn't finished. He stepped closer to Marcus, invading his personal space in that aggressive way he had. Young buck into cougars. Huh? How was it? Man, did she suck you good? The crude sexual comment hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I watched Marcus's face change, not with anger, but with something like disappointment. He looked at me, then back at Rick, and I could see him calculating whether this drama was worth dealing with. I'm not interested in any drama, Marcus said quietly. Maybe this isn't going to work out. For a moment, I panicked. Here was this decent man, this stable influence, and Rick was going to ruin it with his typical garbage behavior. I quickly ushered Marcus outside, away from Rick's smirking face and crude laughter. Please don't let him scare you off, I said. He's my ex-husband, and he's just trying to cause problems because he can't stand seeing me happy. Marcus looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his options. I don't need complications in my life right now. I'm trying to focus on school and building something stable. I can be stable, I promised. Rick doesn't live here. He just shows up sometimes because of the kids, but I can handle him. Eventually, Marcus agreed to give us another chance, but I could tell the encounter had shaken him. He was more cautious after that, more careful about coming over when he thought Rick might be around. I should have seen it as a red flag, not Marcus's caution, but my own willingness to minimize Rick's behavior and promise things I wasn't sure I could deliver. Despite that rocky moment, our relationship progressed quickly. Marcus was unlike anyone I'd ever been with. He brought me flowers, opened doors, and talked to me about his dreams and ambitions. He was working toward his bachelor's degree and had plans for graduate school. He treated me like I was something precious, put me on a pedestal in a way that felt intoxicating after years of Rick's neglect and disrespect. By 1999, we were married. I sold my ranch house and moved in with him, ready to start this new chapter of my life. For the first time in years, I felt like I was with someone who truly valued me. Marcus would tell me I was beautiful, would listen when I talked about my day, and would include me in his plans for the future. He talked about the life we'd build together, the success he'd achieve, and how he wanted to take care of me. But then graduate school started, and everything changed. Marcus threw himself into his studies with a dedication that initially impressed me, then gradually began to irritate me. He was constantly reading, writing papers, attending seminars, and meeting with study groups. Our conversations shifted from dreams about our future to his stress about deadlines and research projects. The flowers stopped coming. The romantic dinners became quick meals grabbed between study sessions. What really started to bother me was how little attention he was paying to our physical relationship. We went from being intimate regularly to maybe once a week, and even then, it felt like he was going through the motions. His mind was always somewhere else, on some theory he was working through or some paper he needed to finish. I'd try to initiate something, and he'd be responsive but distracted. Like he was mentally reviewing his to-do list even while we were together. I started to resent the time he spent with his study group, especially because there was this Middle Eastern girl named Amira who seemed to monopolize a lot of his attention. She was always calling with questions about assignments, always needing help understanding some concept or another. Marcus would spend hours on the phone with her, patiently explaining things in that gentle way he had, and I'd sit there listening to him give her the kind of focused attention that I wasn't getting anymore. She's really struggling with the material, Marcus would explain when I'd make comments about all the time he spent helping her. English isn't her first language, so some of the theoretical concepts are harder for her to grasp, but I could hear the way she laughed at his jokes, the way her voice got softer when she talked to him. I wasn't stupid. I knew what it looked like when a woman was interested in a man, and Amira was definitely interested in my husband. The fact that Marcus seemed oblivious to it only made it more frustrating. I tried to be understanding at first. I knew graduate school was demanding, and I wanted to be supportive of his goals, but months went by with this same pattern. Marcus buried in books, constantly stressed about deadlines, and me feeling more and more like a roommate he occasionally remembered to acknowledge. The man who had once made me feel like the center of his universe now treated me like a minor character in his academic journey. The worst part was how he'd dismiss my concerns when I tried to talk to him about it. This is just temporary. He'd say, once I get through this program, things will go back to normal. But normal was feeling like a priority in my own marriage, and I was starting to wonder if that was ever going to happen again. I found myself thinking about Rick more often. For all his faults, and there were many, Rick had never ignored me. He was crude, unfaithful, and generally awful, but he was also passionate and present when we were together. He didn't treat me like an afterthought or something he'd get around to when he had time. Rick was a piece of crap, but he was an attentive piece of crap who made me feel desired. The breaking point came on a Thursday in late spring. Marcus announced that he was going to a 3-day academic conference in another city. He'd be presenting some research and attending seminars that were crucial for his thesis development. He packed his little overnight bag with the same methodical care he brought to everything else, kissed me goodbye with the distracted affection of someone whose mind was already elsewhere, and left me alone in our house for 3 days. That's when I called Rick. I told myself I just wanted someone to talk to, someone who would actually listen and pay attention to me. Rick still owned his vanity shop, still had that same cocky confidence that had attracted me in the first place. When I called, he seemed genuinely happy to hear from me. Well, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. What's going on? Beautiful. Trouble in paradise. I found myself telling him about Marcus's constant absence, his obsession with school, and how neglected I felt. Rick listened with the kind of focused attention that Marcus hadn't given me in months. That boy doesn't know what he has, Rick said. You're a woman who needs attention, who deserves to be appreciated. If he's too stupid to see that, that's his loss. Before I really thought about what I was doing, I invited Rick over. He arrived within an hour, and the moment I opened the door, I remembered what I'd been missing. Rick looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. He didn't have a stack of papers to grade or a thesis to worry about. He was there for me, completely present, in a way Marcus hadn't been in months. We started in the living room, just talking and catching up, but the conversation quickly turned physical. Rick had always been more aggressive than Marcus, more demanding, and that intensity felt like exactly what I needed after months of being treated like an afterthought. We moved to the kitchen. Then, eventually, to the bedroom I shared with Marcus. I wasn't thinking about marriage vows or consequences. I was thinking about feeling wanted again, about being with someone who was completely focused on me instead of distracted by academic obligations. Rick made me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. What I didn't know was that Marcus's conference had been shortened. Some scheduling conflict had compressed the 3-day event into 2 days, and he'd decided to come home early to surprise me. I was in the bedroom with Rick when I heard the front door open downstairs. For a split second, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. But then I heard Marcus's voice calling my name. The sound sent a shock of panic through me. But before I could even begin to process what to do, Marcus was coming up the stairs. He burst through the bedroom door with a force I'd never seen from him before. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted, and his voice cracked with a combination of rage and devastation that made my stomach drop. Rick, true to form, seemed almost amused by the situation. He had this evil laugh as he casually started getting dressed. Like getting caught in bed with another man's wife was just another Thursday afternoon for him. Marcus stood in the doorway, and I could see him fighting back tears while trying to maintain some shred of dignity. His hands were shaking, and there was this look in his eyes like his entire world had just collapsed. "Get the hell out of my house now," he said, his voice barely controlled. When I started to speak, to try to explain or justify what had happened, he put his hands up. "I don't want to hear it. Both of you. Get out of my house now." Rick found the whole thing hilarious. He finished getting dressed with deliberate slowness, like he was enjoying Marcus's pain. "Come on, man," he said with that smirk I remembered so well. "Don't be so dramatic." But Marcus wasn't interested in Rick's commentary. He stood there, tears threatening to spill over, but his resolve absolutely firm. "Get out. Both of you. Now." There was no room for negotiation in his voice. No opening for the kind of manipulation I might have tried with Rick. Marcus had made his decision the moment he walked through that door, and nothing I could say was going to change it. Rick and I gathered our clothes and left. As we walked out, I could see neighbors peering through their windows. Drawn by the shouting, the humiliation was almost as sharp as the panic I felt about what I'd just destroyed. I came back later that evening with the kids, thinking maybe Marcus would have calmed down. Maybe we could talk through what had happened. Instead, I found all of my belongings thrown in the front yard. Clothes, personal items. Everything I'd brought into our marriage was sitting in a pile on the grass like garbage waiting for pickup. Marcus wouldn't come to the door. He wouldn't answer his phone. When I tried to go inside, I found that he'd changed the locks. The message was clear. I was no longer welcome in the house that had been our home. The divorce proceedings were swift and cold. Marcus handled everything through his lawyer, refusing to have any direct contact with me. I kept hoping he'd want to talk, that we could work through what had happened, but he maintained complete radio silence. His lawyer made it clear that Marcus wanted a clean break with no ongoing connection between us. I tried calling, sending letters, even showing up at places I knew he might be, but Marcus had effectively erased me from his life. It was like our entire relationship had been deleted the moment he walked through that bedroom door. With nowhere else to go and kids to take care of, I ended up moving back in with Rick. He was still the same selfish, crude man he'd always been, but at least he was willing to take us in. The kids hated it. They remembered what their father was like. And they weren't happy about being back in his orbit, but I didn't have many options. Rick still owned his vanity shop and made decent money, so there was financial stability, even if there wasn't much else. He made it clear that our arrangement was primarily about convenience and sex. He wasn't interested in being a real partner or stepfather figure. He wanted a live-in girlfriend who wouldn't ask too many questions about where he went or what he did. Over the years, I discovered that Rick was still the same cheating piece of garbage he'd always been. I'd find evidence of other women, text messages, receipts from restaurants I'd never been to, the occasional lipstick stain or unfamiliar perfume smell, but by then, I felt like I deserved it. It was karma for what I'd done to Marcus, and I didn't have the moral authority to complain about Rick's infidelity when I destroyed my own marriage the same way. Meanwhile, Marcus went on to become incredibly successful. I'd see his name in the local paper sometimes. Awards he'd won, recognition for his work, speaking engagements at prestigious events. He'd become something of a local celebrity in academic circles. Exactly the kind of accomplished professional he'd always planned to be. I started following him on social media, though he didn't know it. I created fake accounts just to keep tabs on what he was doing, who he was with, how his life was progressing. What I saw made the loss even more painful. Marcus had achieved everything he'd talked about during our brief marriage. He was respected, successful, and seemed genuinely happy with his life, but he'd never married again. In 25 years, there had been no wedding announcements, no pictures with a long-term partner, no children. It was like that one betrayal had convinced him that marriage wasn't worth the risk. Sometimes I wondered if I'd broken something in him that had never healed. If my selfishness had cost him the chance at the family he used to talk about wanting. The worst part was realizing that Marcus would have been even more successful if he'd never met me. All the time and emotional energy he'd invested in our relationship, all the disruption and pain of the divorce, that could have been channeled into his career and personal growth instead. I'd been a detour that had cost him precious time and trust. Now Rick and I are both 65, and we're still together out of habit and convenience more than anything else. He still cheats, still treats me with casual disrespect, and still makes crude comments that remind me why I divorced him in the first place. But he also still provides financial security and physical intimacy, which at my age feels like more than I deserve or am likely to find elsewhere. My adult children and grandchildren can't stand Rick, Abe. They remember what he put our family through during my first marriage to him. And they've never forgiven him for the chaos and instability he brought into their lives. Family gatherings are tense when Rick is around. And I know my relationships with my kids have suffered because of my choice to stay with him. But the alternative, being alone, starting over at 65, trying to build something new, feels impossible. I made my choices, and now I'm living with the consequences. Rick is still a piece of crap, but he's familiar, and familiarity feels safer than the unknown. Sometimes I think about what my life would have been like if I'd been able to appreciate what I had with Marcus, if I'd been more patient with his academic demands, more understanding of the temporary nature of graduate school stress, more committed to working through problems instead of running to someone else for validation. Marcus and I could have built something beautiful together. He had the character, ambition, and integrity to be an amazing partner, and I threw that away for a few hours of physical gratification with my worthless ex-husband. I tell myself that Marcus was probably going to leave me anyway, that men like him don't stay with women like me long-term, and I convinced myself that he was already emotionally checked out, that the cheating was just the final straw in a relationship that was already doomed. But deep down, I know that's not true. Marcus was committed to our marriage. Even when it was difficult, he was working toward a future that included both of us. And I destroyed that future because I couldn't handle being temporarily less important than his education. The hardest thing to accept is that I did this to myself. Rick didn't seduce me or manipulate me into betraying my marriage. Marcus didn't abandon me or treat me badly enough to justify what I did. I made a selfish choice because I wanted immediate gratification more than I wanted to preserve something valuable. I traded a man of integrity for a man who laughs at other people's pain. And I've been paying for that choice ever since. But I can't change what happened. And Marcus clearly has no interest in revisiting the past. He's built a successful, peaceful life without me in it. And maybe that's exactly what he needed. Maybe my betrayal, as painful as it was, freed him from a relationship with someone who wasn't worthy of his trust and devotion. All I can do now is live with the consequences of my choices and try to find some measure of contentment in the life I've created. It's not the life I could have had, but it's the life I chose, one selfish decision at a time.